Imagine walking through a forest, the crisp leaves crunching underfoot, the scent of damp earth filling the air. You glance down and spot a tiny, delicate mushroom growing from the bark of a fallen tree. You admire its texture and intricate details. Now imagine recreating that moment, stitch by stitch, with nothing but thread, fabric, and an artist's eye for detail. That's exactly what today's guest does with breathtaking precision. Hi, I'm Angela Truscott, founder of Take Two, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Amanda Cobbett, an award-winning textile artist with over 25 years of experience. From her studio in Surrey Hills, Amanda embroiders fungi and lichen sculptures, so lifelike you'll swear they were plucked straight from the forest floor. But they aren't. They're meticulously crafted, layer by layer, through machine embroidery, paper mache, and even pyrography to capture the beauty and fragility of nature. Today, we'll learn about Amanda's creative process, how she developed her signature techniques, and her recent 2-year project documenting the fungi and lichens on the Duke of Buccleuch estates. If you've ever felt inspired by nature and longed to create artwork that intersects science, storytelling, and textiles, this conversation is for you. You'll get a behind-the-scenes look at Amanda's process and her insights on capturing nature in stitch. But before we dive in, if you're watching live, drop us a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. We love seeing our global community come together. And if you have any questions for Amanda throughout the interview, pop them in the chat. If you're catching this on replay, you can subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on future inspiring Friday feature conversations like this one. So settle in. This is going to be a fascinating conversation with an artist who quite literally stitches the beauty of the forest floor into existence. Please help me in welcoming Amanda Cobbett. Before we begin, we respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which this live broadcast is being recorded. Welcome, Amanda. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Angela.
And it's early morning for you in the UK, and the sun is just setting in Warrandyte, Victoria, Australia. So it's wonderful to connect.
Coming up here, we are just peeping up through the trees that I can just see in front of me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we've got lots of people joining in live from across the world to ask you hopefully lots of questions today. I'm looking forward to an interactive session. We've got Hanneke, hello, lovely to see you from the Netherlands. Eva, it's always lovely to see you. Eva's one of our beautiful regulars that tunes in. Hey, Wendy from the UK. Kent is lovely. Vicky, lovely to see you. Hope you're staying cool. It's quite hot where we are. Canberra, gorgeous. Ballarat. Now, before we get started, Amanda, because you were just talking about the sun rising and I was talking about the sun setting, and this wasn't set up at all, but when we were just talking offline, you showed me this beautiful image of your forest, which is just outside of, 20-minute walk from where you are. This is the most adorable image. Yes. Tell us about this one.
Oh, it's 20-minute walk uphill with my dogs. It's somewhere that we as a family visit on a daily basis. It's so beautiful. It's a pine forest, and it used to be heathland. It's now pine forest, but this was just at sunset, and it was one of those images that until you get home and you really have a look through your camera, you don't know that you've actually captured something that is so beautiful. But that's just as the sun's setting, and it's because we're where we live here is at the bottom of the hill. You have to walk up to see the sun setting, because sometimes we just see it over the tops of our heads. But that was an autumn evening up there. And this was
Here's another one.
That's the summer evening. So that's behind the first image was at the front of our house. That is behind our house. And we're very lucky that we have the forest at the front of our house and we have the fields behind us. And this was a beautiful late summer evening. And you can see the hay bales, the round hay bales in there. And this is a lovely, lovely walk. And we can just catch the sun setting over the fields. So it's beautiful. And in fact, I forage in both places because I can obviously find field fungi over in the field. So depending on what it is I'm looking for that day, it also sort of dictates where I may walk.
Well, it looks like you're absolutely spoilt for choice. So
we're very, very lucky here. Although our house is actually at the bottom of the valley. So wherever we walk, we have to walk up, but it does actually it's made us quite fit. Having to always
I bet. Amanda, before we dive into your process and your work in more detail, what does the audience need to understand about your past to understand the artist that you are today?
I think I've had a life connected by nature. So even as a child, I think if I wasn't inside with my grandma's sewing, and that was, I was a child of the 70s. So that was something that happened on a daily basis, probably with either my grandmother's or my mother. And I often say that the sound of the sewing machine is the soundtrack to my life, because there was always somebody sewing on a machine. But if I wasn't doing that, I was outside playing with my brothers. And I think because, my dad was always outside and he built our first house between two oak trees, and it was this incredible life that I was very fortunate to have. And I suppose being surrounded all the time by nature has has formed my appreciation and understanding. When I was little, I always had my pockets filled with acorns and conkers and bits that used to drive my mother mad, because I'd come back and my pocket, I'd empty everything out and it would all be over my bedroom floor. And I think that sort of followed on through my life of wanting to understand how to make those observations. So throughout my education, I trained as a printed textile designer, but I specialized in botanical illustrative prints. So, and I learned very young, I was drawing a lot. And my mother encouraged me to draw. She would have loved to have gone to art college, but she wasn't encouraged. So I think when she knew that I was interested, or I had a natural inclination to draw, she encouraged me every step of the way, and was teaching me. My father taught me how to draw in 3D objects, which actually later on in my career became really important to understand how a three-dimensional object works. And my mother taught me how to draw everything else, and she taught me how to draw perspective and how to do shading. And I think I was always trying to make all my drawings, and my mum still got some of my drawings from when I was a teenager, and she's kept them because she still loves them, but I was always doing observational drawings rather than things from my imagination. And I think I used my imagination for playing outside in the garden and picking up all of these objects. So I think that really sort of has led me to where I am now, as much as my education has. It was my parents' influence on my life.
Yeah, it's a common story, that, isn't it, about parents of a certain age and time would have loved to have been artists themselves, but life, the stigma of life at that time had different paths. So, but it's lovely that you can be encouraged to do that. And we're encouraging our daughter to do that as well.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
Yeah. I don't think I appreciated it at the time, because they never ever pushed me. They never said, you know, we want you to go to art college, or we want you to be a lawyer, we want you to, you know, do any of these things. They never pushed me. They just let me see how far I could push myself. And I think that was really valuable in that I set my own goals, and I've always set my own goals, and I've always strived to be the best that I can be. And by them not pushing me, and you know, a lot of kids get pushed into things that maybe they feel that is not for them. And but by actually them, my mum always used to say, she used to use reverse psychology on me all the time. But clearly something worked. She did a good job.
That's excellent. Good on you, Mum.
Yeah.
So you consider yourself an accidental embroiderer. What was the turning point for you, like, to make that pivot from printed textiles into like 3D embroidery or sculpture?
Well, actually, it was moving where we are now. So I'm sat in my studio, which is tucked away at the back of our little cottage. And I didn't have this studio when we first moved here. And I moved here. We had my son and a dog, and I was just pregnant with my daughter, and I was suddenly not isolated, but not exactly convenient for London anymore, and going up to work in the city. And so I knew something needed to change, and I needed to make a life for myself here that included being here for my children and my dog, and not paying somebody to do that. And I had the luxury that my husband is hardworking. So actually I had a little break for about 5 years, and my mother-in-law, her best friend, actually gave me the Bonina sewing machine, because she knew that I didn't, it was probably the one time in my life that I didn't have a sewing machine, or didn't have access to a sewing machine. And she is an embroiderer, but she does hand embroidery. And she gave me the machine and gave me an embroiderer's hoop, and kind of just left me to it. And because I have no formal embroidery training, I just experimented. And it was really during my walking with the dog and my baby, my little daughter, that it was my dog was getting old, and it became a really slow process, but it just made me slow down. And you know, from a busy London job suddenly to being sort of popped into the countryside and taking a different view on life gave me the opportunity to explore all the things that I desperately wanted to, but hadn't had the time. And it was lovely. It was lovely just to then walk out in the forest and start, you know, it was just walking along the fence up by the graveyard. The graveyard is also our church. We live opposite the church, and the graveyard is right up in the top of the forest. But along the fence of the forest, it's really gnarly, and there's a lot of lichen and moss that grows. And I just as a child, everything. I was a bottom shuffler, and I observed everything with my hand. You know, everything was touch by touch, and I still have that. I need to feel things to understand them. So I used to run my hand along the top of the fence as we walked up to the graveyard. And it was that suddenly everything sort of fell into place of how could I recreate this beauty? It's absolutely stunning. And I think it was a culmination of that. And also I'd with my mother-in-law and the kids, I'd taken this trip down to Devon to a place called Overbeck's, which is a National Trust property. They have this bizarre collection of musical instruments and like ornithological exhibits, and they're all in these beautiful glass cases and beautiful taxidermy birds, but also slightly macabre, because, you know, as much as they're lovely, you know that the way that they've been captured and killed and then stuffed. And although, you know, it was we need to understand about nature, and that was a way of bringing nature into the masses, so people could, you know, observe them in detail. But and it was a combination of those things that suddenly I thought, how could I recreate something from nature, but that I wasn't, you know, killing something, or you know, something didn't have to die in the process of me creating something. And with the combination of the sewing machine and the things that I was finding out in the forest, this sort of it was like a light bulb moment of, oh, I know I could try and recreate that, and recreate everything about it, including the root, you know, of a fungi, like the roots and the dirt, and as if imagining that you just literally gone and plucked that out of the forest. And
something that
it's
so
sort of like you want it to be a bit like trickery, but it's something that hopefully it makes you look a bit more, especially if you're looking at the embroidery, because you know in your head that it's not real. It can't be, because it wouldn't survive in a case. But for a split second you might think, what is that? How's that been made? And it's that wonderment of how something is made that makes you look. And you know, even down to the way that I present the pieces in the cases. The cases are they have you can see them almost 360-degree view of the piece of work, and that was really important. And that's a sort of take on the Edwardian style of, you know, Edwardian cases, sorry. Because if you make something in 3 dimensions, you want to be able to see it all. And I mount the pieces on using perspex rods, and I do that purposefully, because it then appears that the piece, it appears to be floating. And I think that has a real you know, I don't want that. When I first started making them, I used little entomology pins and pinned everything down, you know, like you would with a butterfly. But actually they don't, the embroideries aren't hugely heavy, but the pins are not strong enough to support the embroidery. So, and I'd have to use loads and loads of pins. So I found these rods, and I mount the pieces using these perspex rods, which gives it some rigidity, but also doesn't take away from the piece because they're clear. So Amanda, so that's a very long-winded way about how
it just sounds like such a process of self-discovery during that time. Did you ever imagine that you'd end up where you are now, like commissions, working on a Duke's estate, sold out Chelsea flower show exhibits? Like, hello.
No, I honestly didn't. And I've never, and I think going back to my parents and they're sort of not pressurizing me with an expectation, I think that's followed through my life. I've never approached something with any expectation of how I think something should be, even when I'm making one piece, you know, each individual piece, but also anything in my life. And of course you make calculated risks. You know, doing Chelsea Flower Show is a calculated risk. It costs a huge amount of money to exhibit at the show. And you have to know that you're going to see, or that you're confident that you will see some kind of return to that. Otherwise, you know, it would be a very foolhardy mission if you didn't think that you could do that. And I think I've spent a lot of my life, I've always been freelance, so I've always kind of made those calculated risks. But I think I've had the freedom to be able to do that as well. So no, I didn't. There are times when I feel like I should pinch myself that that I have been so lucky to have been given some of the projects that I'm given, and the commissions that I have are lovely. And I always feel like I have a very good relationship with the people that I'm working with for commissions, not just for the Duke, but for everybody else that commissions me. We have, you know, lovely conversations about how they feel about the work, and whether they want me to create something that is from here, where I live, or whether they want me to create something that is from where they live. And does that include me doing a site visit to them, and a walk, or you know, how are we going to achieve this sort of common goal that we both want? And you know, as I was saying to you earlier, you know, textiles is very much for me about a conversation, an ongoing conversation. And you know, I hope that when I'm creating this work, that we are having an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you were talking about commissions there. How do you, artists often struggle with between that, you know, their creative desire to do what they want to do and balancing that act of a commission. How do you balance that? Do you still get some artistic freedom when creating?
All the time. So so when people are, I think I'm really lucky, because most people that ask for commissions are not directing me. So I think the understanding is very much, I would maybe send them some images and say, look, this is past work, this gives you an idea. I cannot create that exact piece again. That's not what this is about. And they understand that they understand that I would be going out again and finding a specimen to create from, not necessarily the exact same one that I've created before. So there is very much that. So I've set the expectation, I suppose, beforehand. And I think when I first started doing commissions, I felt more directed by the customer or the client, and actually that doesn't work, because especially if there's more than one thing in a case, you know, if someone says to me, oh, I really like this, and it's a really bright red fungi, and I really like this one and it's white, I would very gently advise that maybe these are beautiful, but they're beautiful in two separate cases. They're not necessarily beautiful in the same case. And, you know, you wouldn't find these two together. So we're not going to put them together in the same case, because that doesn't work. So I do, and like I was saying, with my clients, I'm having that ongoing conversation about how things should sit together, and what works and what doesn't work. And I always say to somebody, I don't want you to, you can commission me for this piece, but if you really don't like it, I would rather that you say that you don't like it, and I'll sell it to someone else, because I feel I can always sell a piece of work, and I'll make you something else. But you might have to wait again, you know, for that to happen. As it turns out, nobody has turned down a commission. Nobody's told me that they haven't liked it. But you know, there'll always be I'm sure there will be an instance where that happens. But I would hate for someone to own something that I'd made that they didn't like, because it's deeply personal for them as well, and it's got to work. It's got to work both ways. So when I'm creating something, the pleasure is 100% mine. You know, I've had the absolute pleasure in creating that. But if someone has that on their wall, they've got to love it as much as I've loved making it. And sometimes I might make two pieces. So I'll make a companion piece to go with the piece that's been commissioned, and I'll give a choice. So I'll say, I've made this, but I've also made this. You choose. They're very similar, because I know that the companion piece that I would, you know, I can sell to somebody else. So I have people approach me often and say, have you got any pieces that you available to buy? Some people just, they don't want to commission it, they want something to buy. It's usually a husband 3 weeks before Christmas, to be honest. Which usually I'm just like, oh no, I can't keep making spare pieces for the desperate husband 3 weeks before Christmas.
Lucky
sorry,
wives.
husbands, it's true.
So what is it particularly about fungi and lichen that fascinates you and draws you to recreate them in stitch?
Well, partly, as I said before, it was about walking and being out there in nature. But also, as a student, I was invited to this incredible collection of work from one of Cook's voyages on the Endeavour, and they were Sydney Parkinson's illustrations, and they were incredible. And I think that really piqued my interest in plant hunting. And you know, these incredible people who were surviving in the most awful conditions were going, you know, halfway across the world or all the way around the world, and discovering all of these new species and of flora and fauna, and illustrating them and then bringing them back for us to, you know, for us in the UK to see. And that was the thing that piqued my interest. And then because I had this library pass as a student, and I could go to the Natural History Museum library and Kew Library. So then I started going to Kew Library because I was a student in London, and they were so welcoming, and they would show me every single department that I'd say, oh, what's this about? I don't know anything about mycology. What is this department about? And they would take me, and then I would go to this weird department, and they would open these drawers of, they can only be described as sort of shriveled up specimens with spore prints. And, you know, they'd show you, and they were just delighted that there was a student who was mildly interested in their department. And I would spend literally hours just opening drawers with them and them showing me things. And I was because I suppose I knew nothing about mycology, I knew nothing, you know, about fungi at all. And that was my first introduction. But there was something kind of sad about it, because they had the specimen, but of course those specimens do not survive. And actually deep in the vaults of Kew, which I have since been to, these incredible rooms where they have like replicas, so wooden and wax replicas of fungi that have been made hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they have them all stored in their vaults. And that was just this. It was just this incredible, like, this is another world that we need to know. I need to know more about. So then, on my sort of forays in the forest, I was finding all these incredible fungi and thinking, this is the thing that I want, that I'm fascinated by, and these are beautiful. It's the flowering. Was the equivalent of the flowering body of a you know, the fungi that's just the bit that's coming up for such a short amount of time, and actually the real work's being done underground.
Yeah. So when you go on your walks, what is it that grabs you? Like, I mean, are you looking for something particular, or is it just what grabs your eye on that day?
Yeah, it's generally what grabs my eye on that day, but it's also, I think I've trained my eye to look for color. Yeah. So especially, you know, there obviously everything is seasonal. So for instance, at this time of year, the lichens have their moment. So it's like the moment in the spotlight are for the lichens, because there's no leaves on the trees. And you know, I always feel like, especially at Christmas, like the lichens are sort of like the world's tinsel. That's how it feels to me. And I think I have a very childlike approach to looking for things. I feel like I've never really grown up. But I feel like because I still have that feeling of wonderment, and I haven't ever felt like I've lost that I'm not scared of showing who I am and what I'm interested in looking at and touching things. I still feel like I need to just, I'll see something, especially windfall pieces. I'll see, I'm still the kid picking things up and throwing things in my pocket or now my basket. And just being able to touch those pieces and understand the structure. Like I would take a piece of lichen and they're all very different. And I would come home and I would research it or find out which lichen or as close as, part of this is citizen science for me, because without taking it and putting it under a microscope and cutting it up and doing, dropping a pipette of iodine on the specimen, I can't be 100% sure with some things. Some things are obvious, not everything is. But I can bring them home. I can put them under my magnifier. I can understand the structure of them. I can do more research into them. And I'm fascinated by science. I was rubbish at science at school. So I think I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't a good scientist at school. And I'm trying to justify the fact that I could be maybe one day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I think that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for color, texture, something that pings out to me, and I've trained my eye to look for detail, and I think maybe you'd said on somewhere before, that we're inclined to go for a walk and admire the view. We're not necessarily honing our eye and looking at the detail, and I think that's probably because I've had the time and a lot of slow walks. I think that's what I'm looking for, and it could be absolutely anything, and I'm surprised daily by what I can find.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been out for a walk, we've observed, we've found things, we've come home with a basket full of what did you call it, like wind debris? So it's fallen off the tree.
Windfall. Yeah.
Windfall.
So yeah, because you can't. You shouldn't. You have to understand the foraging code. You can't just take moss from a forest. You can't do that. But if it's windfall, I feel like it's okay. And anything that I can't take, that's, I said earlier, I photograph everything in detail that I can't bring with me. But yes, I pick up things, windfall things in my basket, and then I bring them back here to my studio. And there is an amount of time that they do last. Eventually they do dry up. But actually for some things that I want to last longer, I keep them just outside my studio, or if it's summer and it's quite dry, I can spritz things and they do last a bit longer. And it's amazing how it brings back the color. Like moss is an incredible thing that it could dry up. And I can't remember the technical name of it. I'm really terrible with scientific detail, unless I've written it down. But moss you can kind of bring back to life. It just needs to be re-wet to bring it rehydrated to bring it back to life. And I've experimented with specimens that I've had that have literally gone completely almost brown to dry, and then I've put them on a bed of like a light bed. It's not like a shingly, like a gritty compost mix, and I've just gently placed them with their roots on there and then wet them again, and hey presto, they come back to life. So
that's amazing. What's the next part of the process from finding, collecting, then bringing the observations home, looking at them in detail under microscope? What happens next, and walk us through how you finish a piece?
So generally it's straight onto the sewing machine. I don't usually find the time to make watercolor drawings. And although I have done them, the reason I've made watercolor drawings is because I haven't had a sewing machine with me at the time. So I still need to, that was still a way of making observations. But generally I will come back and I will work straight on the machine. So depending on what I'm making, so if, for example, I was making a piece of bark with some lichens or moss and lichen on the top, I will use a base fabric, usually either layers of so these images, so usually layers of like a tearaway fabric or any kind of non-woven fabric, I think works best, like maybe if something that's felted, like a felted wool, and I will build up layers on the sewing machine. So it's a bit like, as most embroiderers who are doing two-dimensional embroidery will understand, it's layering with thread. So I will choose several different colors when I'm making, say, a piece of bark. There would be, I don't know, at least between 30 and 50 different colors that I'm using, and you can see behind me, those are just, this is not even half the threads that I've got here. And I buy threads all the time as well. I'm totally obsessed. But I would choose different, and I will always choose different threads for what I put in the bobbin and on the spool. And I will change the tensions all the time. So some of those under threads are popping up. So I'm just, so I feel like I'm looking at what I've got. So, and then I'm creating the structure by using layers and layers and layers. And then I change my needle from something that, so usually I would use a metallic needle because, or when I say for metallic thread, because I can use that for a long time and it doesn't shear the threads, because quite often I'm using 100 weight threads, which are really fine, because I want to get that detail. So it's a long process. I could have, a couple of days just building up layers on the piece before I'm even thinking about the top layer of how it might look from the top. And also because as the piece gets thicker, I use a tearaway fabric, and which I place underneath the piece of work, because that stops it stops the needle gumming up I've experimented so much, but that if I didn't keep using under layers, then it would just get screwed up in the machine. So yeah, so keep adding layers, keep adding thread.
And you change, do you keep a different color in the bobbin to the
so I'm using so I'm using two different colors, because actually sometimes on the thinner layers it gives us kind of really lovely shot effect. Sometimes it really gives something a lot of movement, and I feel like that's really important as well, that you want as much color detail as possible, because actually when you're moving it around in the light, all that actual real specimen is made up of all of those different colors, and you want to be able to replicate that in the same way. And when it gets really thick, I change my needles to either a leather worker's needle or a denim needle, because they can get through thick fabric. Otherwise you just lose loads of needles. And actually even though I change my needles, they go back in again. And I think the rule was something like you can do 8 hours of sewing on one needle or less, but I do weeks, months sometimes of sewing on the same needles, just because I'm changing the needles around all the time, and I have no adverse effects. So I'm literally torturing the machine. And it is a really basic, I've got 2 Bernina sewing machines, and they're both really basic. They don't do anything fancy. And I just feel like I don't know what the rules are of machine embroidery. I wasn't formally taught, so I'm not following any.
There's such liberation in that, though, I think, not knowing the rules. So you don't know what rules you're breaking or you're not, you're just going for it. And I read somewhere that you stitch on average 100, sorry, I'll start that again. You stitch about 130,000 stitches per day. That's massive.
Yeah, it is massive. But you know, when you're going at 100 miles an hour, because that's what it feels like. I mean, it's not, machine embroidery is not a gentle pursuit. And if that is your perception of what's happening in my life, that's wrong, because it's quite it's not physical, but it's fast. I'm making quick decisions. And you know, I had to do that when I was a printed textile designer. You had to work quickly. That was the idea. You have to make quick decisions about how you're going to put, you know, especially watercolor flowers. You need to know that if you make a mistake, you've potentially ruined something. So, and it's like anybody that's painting, it's very difficult, especially with watercolors, to go over something and then make it still look good. So and although you can stitch over something, that is the beauty, that you could stitch over it until it gets too thick, and then it looks clunky, and then, you know, there is a limit. But yeah, I like quick decision making, and also I don't necessarily follow the same formula. So something that I made, say even the same kind of specimen, so say if I made an Amanita muscaria, which is the very, I don't know if you have them in Australia, but they're very common, and they're red and they've got white spots.
We would call them,
they're called Amanita muscaria. They're called fly agaric. That's it, that one. So
beautiful. Just for the people listening on the podcast, it's it's an amazing, we would call them toadstools, but maybe not. Toadstools probably go down. This one is wrapping up, and it almost creates a bowl with the white spots. It's amazing. So
that image there is just a bit, as the older it gets, the more it sort of unfurls into this lovely concave shape. So if I'm making, say if I'm making one of those, I don't necessarily, even though I've made maybe several different ones, I never follow the same formula, which to a lot of people would be really frustrating. Like, why do you make it hard for yourself by not following the same formula? But for me, the challenge and the enjoyment of it is to not even remember what the formula was that I did before. It's just to enjoy the process for this specimen. And that's what makes everyone kind of different, because I'm not following a formula. I think for me it keeps it really fresh for me as well, because it's the challenge of making the specimen. I don't start, I know I probably should, no, I shouldn't actually. I was going to say I should start with a preconceived idea, but I never do. And I'm just enjoying the creative process, and it turns out, I never feel like I'm disappointed with the way it turns out, but I've had the freedom of being in the moment and enjoying the process at 100 miles an hour on the sewing machine.
Fantastic. Vicky has just said we have them in Australia too. Thanks, Vicky.
Oh, okay.
That's amazing. Yeah, a type of toadstool, we call it. Yeah, we have several species of. A couple of questions have come through, Amanda, from our live audience. Eva's asked, and you may have covered this, but what is the substrate you've been working on when you make the small round objects? And I think I showed an earlier image of them.
So I put so anything that's really delicate, I make separately, and I use a dissolvable fabric in an embroidery hoop. You couldn't do it without a hoop. You couldn't use dissolvable fabric without a hoop, because you need it under tension because it is so fine. And there are two different ones that I use. One is it looks, it's very lightweight, but it looks more plasticky, which sounds horrible, but it's not. And I use maybe 2 layers of that because it is so fine. And then there's another one that feels more like a fabric, but still dissolves under warm water. And I'm very careful about how I dissolve after I've embroidered something, because something that's so fine and delicate, you can't put that under a tap. Okay. You have to. So I've sort of found a technique of, by using my paintbrush, of dissolving the fabric around the embroidery. So I have a little a dip bowl and a paintbrush, and I use some layers of like kitchen roll. I put it on my kitchen roll, and then gently wash away or remove the dissolvable fabric in order for it to keep its structure. And then I can very gently then sort of peel it off and dry it in and mold it into shape as I'm doing it. So yeah, so dissolvable fabric plays a sort of a large part in the pieces that I make.
Yeah, amazing. What about the pyrography, the burning of the threads? How did that become part of your process? And can you tell us a little bit about how you use that technique to enhance the realism of your pieces?
Yeah, so I'm not really sure how I discovered it, but I don't know actually. I studied as a student. I'd studied sculpture, so I'd always used soldering, because my sculpture were metalwork sculptures, so I did proper arc welding and all sorts. So I'd always used fire and tools in that way. And I think it started with just a soldering iron, but a soldering iron doesn't necessarily have the same precision as a pyrography tool. So I think I've advanced. Well, I know I have advanced to the pyrography tool with sharp points rather than the soldering iron. But it was for 2 things, I suppose. First of all, to get that sort of decay. And that I felt like it was really necessary to find a way of showing how, because right, everything you assume in, well, no, you don't assume, but everything in nature, when you see something and you think, oh, that's perfect, but of course it's not perfect, because nothing is perfect. And you want to be able to show, I want to be able to show all of its little imperfections, because that's part of its story. So it might have been nibbled a bit by a slug or an insect. And in order to get that sort of perfect whole, I might just sear into the fabric, because I've in effect embroidered a new fabric. I've made loads and loads of layers. I've molded it into shape. The fungi caps are all self-supporting, so they're not stuffed. They haven't got anything inside that is stuffing them to support them. They're all self-supporting. They are just thread. But if I want to finish the rim of the cap and not only make it sort of neat and sharp, but also to show, because actually when you really start studying fungi, you can see that you find those little details. So I'm using that tool to just add those little details. But I will say, when I'm using it, I do wear a face mask, and I have an extractor fan in my studio. It's just a portable extractor fan, and I have that on when I'm sewing as well, because any dust that's in the air, I want to have that removed. I don't want to kill myself by making these pieces of work by not observing sort of healthy practices. So if I do any burning at all, I do use a mask, because I think that is really important. You've got to look after yourself. And actually, over the years, I've used it. I used to use it a lot, and now I use the burning tool less, because I've just found other ways of producing a similar effect. And I'm updating those all the time. If I find something, or if I've in my travels, I find something that I think might might be another way of making something, then I'm experimenting with that all the time. I used to use a lot more paper than I do now, just because I found other ways of producing, especially some of the lichens I used to burn away, like a Tyvek kind of fabric. I used to dye that and burn that away. But now I found a way that I can embroider it and do it in a finer detail. So I kind of switch it up.
Yeah. For someone who's never done free motion embroidery before, and they're wanting to maybe start dabbling, have some experimentation, have a bit of a play, what tips could you give them? Like, what guidance would you say to them?
So the key things for free motion embroidery are the tension on your machine. So if you haven't got the tension in both your bobbin and on the top of your machine on your spool, if you haven't got your tension right on both of those things, then you will come unstuck. So you need to understand, it's understanding your machine. Okay, it's such a basic process. You have your feed dogs down, so you can drive the fabric or the stitching yourself. All your stitch length and width is on 0. So you're the one in control. It's like painting. You're using your needle as your painting tool or your drawing tool. It's to buy yourself an embroidery hoop and try some different. Don't start off with dissolvable, because that could be a frustration. That's something to work your way up to. Use a really light fabric that you can get into your embroidery hoop. Get your tensions right from the fabric in your hoop. That needs to be really tight, and experiment with threads. I use such a mixture of threads. So I use rayons, polyesters, silks, and cottons. I choose a company that I buy my threads from that has really good eco credentials, and for me that is something that's really important.
And what company is that, Amanda?
So the company that I use is Madeira. They are a German company, I think. But if you look online at Madeira threads and look at their sustainability and the way they produce their threads, I've done a lot of research, and I think for me they are the best company that produce what I want. And that won't be the same for everybody. There might be somebody else that finds something that suits them better, but there's a really good choice of threads. I have, how many have I got there? 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 different color cards there, and each have got about 400 threads to each color card. Wow. So there's a massive choice, and thread weight is really important. I started all the threads. I knew nothing about weights of threads when I first started doing this. And I use a lot of 100 weight thread, which is very, very fine, almost hair-like fine threads, because I want detail. But if I was putting down my initial colors, I'd use 40 weight threads, because they're just a bit more robust and they give a good background, sort of initial base layer. It's just experiment. I think if you feel restricted in any way or uptight about making at all, then I think that's kind of where you come unstuck. You need to feel like you can just let it go. And then I think, enjoy experimenting, because it doesn't matter if you don't make anything for months. It just doesn't matter, as long as you're understanding the processes. And I think until you can understand the processes, you won't. I think starting and thinking that you're going to make something incredible from the get-go is a mistake. Just enjoy the process would be my advice.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing those tips and advice for people. I think it's so important to, you're right, just I mean, in the beginning, to go into your studio and experiment, learn your materials, learn how they're going to
Yeah.
respond, and then start getting a little bit more serious about things. Petra asked a
Yeah.
question earlier. She said, do you use photography to document all the specimens in detail so that you can work from them in future?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah. Things that I can't bring away with me, I have to photograph them. And I take as many photographs as possible. Between my phone and my decent camera, I have hundreds of thousands of photographs that and sometimes, I might take a photograph and take quite detailed photographs of one specimen, and then I might go back the next day and see if it's still there and see how it's degraded and how it's changed. And when I'm selling that piece of work, all the pieces come with a certificate, and it has all the details on the certificate of what the specimen is, and if I've got the extra detail of where it's been found in the way of a grid reference, or what time of day it was, or the weather conditions, the condition of the species, all of that. If I've got that, if I've written all that detail down at the time, and it's not always possible when I'm out on a dog walk, I can't always do that. But if I'm going specifically, so for instance, with the Duke of Buccleuch's work that I've been working on for the last 2 years, I was careful to add all of that detail, because for the project, for the Buccleuch estate, that was something that was really important, because the idea for that was that they wanted to know what they had, so they know. I mean, that's the point of this, right? I'm making something for people, and although they see it in a gallery setting, the idea is that they'll go and look at that work, and then they will potentially then go for a walk in the forest, and then maybe find or think to look for some of those things that they've seen in a gallery setting. And if that's a good thing, if that's the way we're connecting with nature, that we are looking at artworks and then maybe going and looking for the actual specimens that someone's seen in a gallery setting, and that's something that's really important to me. So yeah, photographing is a massive thing to me, but also documenting the things that I find as well, especially like I said, for projects.
A few comments from the audience, Amanda. Patricia says, I think that is wonderful to just enjoy the process. Yes.
Yeah.
And Eva said, thank you for the when you were talking about your dissolvable fabric, that was very helpful. Elizabeth says, science begins with observation. So you are a scientist.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying. I do try, but I know I could probably try hard. Must try harder was probably what I was probably told in science at school, and I think that probably still applies.
And Petra said, yeah, that's a scientific database with all your photographs. So that's amazing. You touched on the Duke of Buccleuch's work that you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about that commission, how it happened, how it came to be, and what you've been doing for the past 2 years, and what's the outcome of it?
Well, it came to be via it felt like a random email, and it's one of those emails that pops into your inbox and you think, is this real or is this not really real? So I was contacted by the Duke's curator. So Scott is the curator of collections for the Buccleuch estate, and I think he'd found me via another curator who possibly his daughter had followed me on Instagram or someone. Instagram's an amazing thing, and I think maybe that's how it came about. So a curator from another stately home in England. So anyway, Scott had very sweetly sent me this email saying that they were interested in a project, and I thinking, I don't know if this is real, very politely sort of said, I'm really busy at the moment, but yes, I am interested, and can you give me a bit more detail? And almost within a minute of pressing send, I had a phone call from Scott saying, you know, yes, we are really interested, and would you like to meet up? So I then went up to the Buccleuch estate is largely on the Scottish borders, but they also have the Duke also has a stately home in Northamptonshire, which is sort of near the Midlands, just below the Midlands. So that image that's Drumlanrig. That's one of his homes on the Scottish borders, of which there are 3. I stayed in the Pink Palace, and it was an incredible time. My daughter and I stayed there. We stayed in the chauffeur's flat, and it was lovely. It was lovely. We had a lovely tour. One of the guides took us on a personal tour of Drumlanrig and told us all the ghost stories, which made us feel great going and sleeping downstairs. But we had an amazing time. In fact, I spent 3 weeks on the Scottish borders. And really, you know, I'm only giving a snapshot because I'm only there for a very small amount of time. And, you know, when you're given something like, I don't know how many thousands of acres it is, something like 220,000 acres of ground, you could obviously, you're never, I only actually, what I need is probably about a square metre. And there was so much information there. So I took a sort of snapshot from each of the places that I stayed at. I stayed in Northampton, and then I stayed in Drumlanrig and Bow Hill, and then I went to the last house, which is just outside of Edinburgh. I didn't stay there, which is in Dalkeith. And I just basically, I spent that week at each place just being able to just go and walk and enjoy the landscape, and made some incredible observations. I had the help and two of the homes. I had rangers who came out and helped me, took me to places that I wouldn't have found on my own, especially in Drumlanrig. Brian, who was a retired ranger, took me and my daughter out for the day, and we were literally deep in the forest, and it's so dark but and mysterious but beautiful. And some of the specimens so incredible. You know, we found this little pocket of chanterelles, and they're bright yellow, and they really, you know, they're just like this beacon in the forest of an area that's really dark. And it was an absolute delight to discover all of these. And I think the ranger was thinking, she's taking loads of photos, she's making loads of notes, this is taking forever. But he was so patient, and we had the day with him, and he took us, you know, not everywhere, but to so many different places that he thought would be of interest for me. So I had loads of photographs, loads of whimsical pieces that I picked up. I couldn't sew while I was away, so I made some watercolor drawings or paintings of some of the things that I found whilst I was there. And just enjoyed being there. And then when I came home, I started to collate the whole collection. And I think at the beginning, I thought I'd maybe make 5 or 6 pieces from each of the stately homes, so around in that area. But actually, as it turned out, I only made 1 piece from Dalkeith, and then made loads from Drumlanrig, because that was really earthy and foresty. And then Bow Hill, which is sort of in the middle of the other two Scottish houses on the borders, was a different kind of atmosphere, and there was lots. So that was from Bow Hill. That's they were in the lawn, just in the lawn, the front lawn of the house, and the Duke very kindly, about a week or so before, had stopped his robotic lawnmowers because he knew that I was coming, and he could see them because he's very in tune with nature, and a very very kind, so welcoming, and loves textiles, and also is interested in preservation, everything in his collection of embroideries and textiles and tapestries and paintings. You know, his family over generation have been huge collectors, and it really feels like he is the custodian of those pieces, and he wants to preserve them in the same way that he understands how I want to preserve nature. And I think I think he really understood and loved the project, and currently has the 26 pieces, the 26 cases of work that I've made over the last 2 years. And it hasn't been full time, because obviously I've needed to work on commissions for other people as well. So, but the thing that it has done, which I hadn't had the opportunity to do probably for the last 5 years, was to experiment with a lot of the pieces. So I was able to try out new techniques and ways of making things, because I knew I had that time in order to do it. So what has come of it is a very unique, and I feel it's a really beautiful collection that will at some point be on display in his four main houses, or you know, maybe two of those houses, depending on what, it's up to them how they decide to exhibit them. But at some point that they will be exhibited. They have already, some of the pieces have already been exhibited at Edinburgh Botanic Gardens in 2 different exhibitions. The last one just finished at the end of December, and that they were really well received, and it's lovely to know that people were really engaging with the work, and the reason that we did the project, and the people's engagement into textiles. I feel like that's a really important thing, because I think naturally we would, you know, we're going to an art gallery and we're not necessarily seeing an awful lot of textiles. And I think it's only maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, we've always had textiles in art, but our perception of textiles is changing, and we feel more connected with textiles as an art form, as well as for a domestic use. You know, and I'm interested in. Go on.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting. A few galleries that I've spoken to, and a lot of the artists that I've spoken to have always said that when there's a textile exhibit on, they get more people through the door. Like, than if it was more traditional forms of art. Well, I don't want to say traditional forms of art, but maybe more non-textile art. So yeah, I have heard that it draws people in, and I was just speaking to someone today, and her textile exhibition has just been extended for another week because it's been so popular. So I think
it's a non-confrontational, because I think we use textiles in domestic setting as well as an art setting, and it doesn't fit. It feels like something that we can easily connect to. And it feels, I think to that end, using it as an art form is really healthy, that we can that we don't feel as confronted by it, then or that, I don't know, maybe we can just understand it more. I think sometimes people are afraid to comment on paintings and sculptures because for fear of, I don't know, feeling uneducated by it. Whereas textiles is something different, because we are all fully aware of what textiles is, right? We're wearing clothes every day. So I think I hope we feel differently about it when we see it as an art form. And I've, I think I'd said to you before, textiles for me is about an ongoing conversation, and that's really what this is my way. Textiles is my way of communicating with everybody. I'm not a particularly, my daughter is incredible. She could write the most beautiful poem, essay, whatever. I can't express myself in words in the same way that I can express myself with textiles, and I feel like this is my voice, and I feel like, especially as women, I think, and I know obviously there are men who make textiles as well, but I think historically it's been a predominantly a more of a female orientated activity. And I think when women haven't had a voice, they've used their textiles as and their embroidery or their knitting or any of those, any textile form, they've used it as their voice. And I think we should shout loud. I think this is important, that we should use our art forms to express ourselves, even if it's just for ourselves or our family. And this probably sounds like, my daughter always says, "Oh my God, Mum, you sound like a really crazy person." But sometimes when I'm in the forest, we're walking away, and I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of stitching my way through the forest. Like my footsteps are like my machine stitches, and that's how it feels sometimes. Maybe I'm just so involved in it that's what the thing that's going on in my life. But I feel like this is how I mark my moment in time. This is me. This is who I am, and this is my stitching is my timeline. And I hope that everybody else who is creative in that way, even whether they're painting or sculpting or stitching, but there's something very intrinsic about that stitching. It's the motion of it, whether you're doing hand embroidery, machine embroidery, or making or knitting or crocheting, making clothing, whatever. You're using, your thread is like your timeline, and that it's telling your story, and that I think has such a the value of that is unmatched. It's beautiful.
Oh, Amanda, thank you so much. That was beautiful to hear how you feel about textiles and why you make your work. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I've got a few last questions, if you don't mind, and then
No.
and then we'll let you go. But you've been so generous with your time and your information and just sharing your passion. So thank you so much. Ross has asked, how long does it take to make a piece of work?
I get asked this a lot. So as an example, a fungi could take anything between say 3 hours and over a week. Okay, so it's only the little ones, the little companion fungi that are in some of the pieces. The tiny little ones I could make in a few hours. The other pieces, so see the tiny little ones in the middle, they're sort of maybe maybe a bit less than a few hours each one, and then the bigger pieces, say the magpie, which is on the top right, that one could take, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days to complete, and some of the bigger ones are definitely a week. However, I would like to say that that's the physical time. The actual time it's taken to produce all this work is like 30 years of textiles. And I think I couldn't have got here making these pieces without the story that's gone before and everything else that I've done in order for me to get here. So and I think also when you're creating something for yourself, you have to it has to have an integrity. So you have to use your life experiences and the way that you feel about something in order to create something. And yeah, you might get that knocked out in an hour, or it might take you 3 years. It doesn't matter. It's, you gotta feel something for it in order for it to be great.
Do you include any hand stitching? Asked Petra.
Yeah, so some of the rooty bits on the fungi need to be hand stitched on, because some of the things and some of the extra elements that I add on top are hand stitched on, and anything that I just cannot hand stitch, I have to glue. But I try and use as little as possible, because if I can literally get in there with my needle and thread, and I'll be honest, I don't love hand stitching, but it's necessary in most cases. For most pieces it is necessary. And bending, there's a lot of bending of needles and a bit of swearing that goes on when it's really thick. There are points and I think I can't do this. I'm going to have to glue it, but I try not to, because I don't really want to add any, more than I need to be honest, of anything that's other than thread.
Yeah. So what's next for you, Amanda? Any exciting projects or exhibitions coming up on the horizon?
Well, I'm working on a couple of commissions at the moment, and there's a potential project on moss, which I'm really interested in doing. So I think it's like with all these things, and especially when they're connected to universities, it's always a question of funding and things getting off the ground. But it's quite science-based, and so that's a potential. And then I'm going to do some work. I think I'm going to, after having done this Buccleuch project, and then now that it's come to an end, there will be some work to do for that still. Not necessarily in terms of stitching, but more in terms of maybe some more painting, which I want to still explore. I suppose I've got to a point now, and I want to. People keep asking me if I'll do a book, and I haven't.
I was just about to ask you that.
Well, I keep putting it on the back burner. So I keep saying, like, people don't want images of the work, surely, do they? But people keep telling me they do. So maybe that's something that I need to explore a bit more, as to whether I will. Whether I would do that.
There's a beautiful book that was released later last year by a lady called Mary Jo Hoffman, and she's the author of Still. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work, but she makes these beautiful still life photographs from nature. So maybe I'll send you the link to her, but she might be someone of inspiration for you to actually go, people just want to be still and look at a beautiful image, and the intricacies of your work would just draw people in that way. I don't think it needs to be overly complex, but Mary Jo Hoffman.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I keep putting it off, and people keep asking me. So maybe this is the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. When the time's right, it's a big commitment to do. And like I believe, like, I just love your journey, how things just have fallen into place, and if a book's meant to be, it'll come.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We don't always, but often we end our Friday Feature Artist interviews with a little segment we call Every Artist Must. Would you like to play along?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, cool. It's just 5 quick questions, and the idea is to try and answer it in one word. But you can go a little bit. I'll let you go a little bit over if you want to.
Oh gosh, how easy that's going to be. Go on, I'll try.
Okay. So the first question is, every artist must find
Peace.
every artist must believe.
In themselves.
Every artist must dare.
To try.
Every artist must avoid.
Self-doubt.
And every artist must appreciate.
The world around them. That's not one word, sorry.
That's beautiful. I love that. The world around us. Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, you answered those amazingly.
Oh.
It was great.
Good.
I just want to, we're at the end of our conversation now. Wendy's made a comment here. She said, I'd buy a book.
Oh, brilliant, Wendy. You're my first customer.
So I wanted to have a shout out. Thank you everyone for joining in live. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. It's been fascinating. I can't wait to follow your journey, Amanda, and just see where this journey of fungi and lichen and who knows what else where it takes you. It's just going to be great, and keep doing what you're doing. It's incredible. I'm going to play a little.
It was great to talk to you. It's great.
Oh, you too. Yeah, it was great to connect. I will just play a short video, and I will pop everybody's notes of gratitude up. So if you'd like to leave a comment for Amanda, pop them in the comments now and we'll put them up. And we'll see you all again next week when we do this again.